Hello and welcome to Mindful Mondays. My name is Michelle Precourt and it is a real pleasure to be here with you today. Before we get started, there's just a couple of points that I would like to start with. And that is first recognizing where I'm calling in from. I'd like to take a moment to note that I'm calling in from the territory of the Squamish people. Very blessed, very grateful for their stewardship of this land. And as well, for anyone who's unfamiliar with where that might be in its colonial terms, it's Squamish, British Columbia. I invite all of you, our viewers who are joining us today, to share in the chat. Please tell us where you're calling in from. We've had folks from coast to coast to coast, in fact, and across countries as well. So please do share in the chat where you're calling in from and say hello. And of course, we're here to serve you, to share our knowledge. And if you have any questions, please share those in the chat as well. Before I tell you about today's guest, who I know you're going to really love what he has to say, for anyone who's new, what is Mindful Mondays? And really, it's the idea behind this is just sharing of knowledge. There's a lot of workplace challenges out there these days, and the idea is to talk about some of those challenges like career-related stress, like wellness. We're going to be diving into that today for sure. And other topics, we've spoken about conflict in the workplace. And, there's just a lot. So if you have a topic that you'd like to hear from, also connect with me. You can do that on LinkedIn here, of course, but also share in the chat. Love to hear from you. So with that, let's talk about today's broadcast. I'd like to introduce all of you to Dr. Ken Keys. He's the president of the Consulting Resource Group, otherwise known as CRG Leader. He is an expert on leadership, on purpose, on wellness, and he's written a number of books. I've got one here with me today, in fact, Why Aren't You More Like Me? He's also written The Quest for Purpose and Deliberate Leadership, and his experience spans the world. And yet he's joining us here today on Mindful Monday. So thanks so much for joining us today, Ken, and welcome.
Well, it's an honor to serve and honor great people like yourself, Michelle.
Thank you. So before we get into things here, I do want to check in with our viewers. So let's see what's happening and his experience in the chat. So please do say hello, and we'd love to hear from you this morning. Okay, so today we're here to talk about wellness, workplace wellness, in fact. And, I'd like to take a step back, Ken, and it's this idea of, at least here's what I think about it, is the pendulum has swung. So at one point, the employer and the employee relationship was really quite simple. Mm-hmm. So the employer said, hey, I've got a job for you to do. We want you to do XYZ, and I will pay you for XYZ. And it was as simple as that. But today, the world of work has really shifted, and the current demographics in the workforce, these are the children of the millennials. Yes, I know that's hard to believe, but the children of the millennials, they want a whole lot more. The expectations are a whole lot higher. And I'm not at all saying that that's wrong. I say, hey, if you can get it, go for it, and use your voice in a meaningful way to ask for what is important. And so what we're seeing here is that, of course, employers are having a hard time retaining talent because of all these needs. And staying, in terms of staying competitive, workplace wellness is one of those things that we're seeing more and more on. So I'm curious to hear from you, Ken. What are you seeing from the leaders that you're working with?
Well, I think obviously the acknowledgement of wellness being an important piece is number one, as you've mentioned. People are talking about mental health and mental wellness. And in a lot of cases, there's a misunderstanding. We'll get into it in this next 20, 25 minutes about it, that misunderstand what does that really mean. And I think the other one that's a shift, not just employers, is that our encouragement is that each individual needs to take responsibility for their wellness levels. I can't be well on your behalf, Michelle, and vice versa. I have to own my own space. So I think there's that other side, is that getting other people to do it for you, but also doing it. The shift is to do it with each other, and this acknowledgement that there is this need, but also this desire, but also this quest to be able to be healthy. And for the most part, we're not.
Yeah. And, that makes me think of something that, in fact, just happened today, Ken. I was sitting having my coffee and my phone rang. It was about 7:30 this morning, and it was an employee. So I do HR consulting. I know some of our viewers, and you know this, Ken. And so I'm doing some work with an organization in the city. And an employee called me this morning, and I knew, I didn't know who it was. So I answered the call quite hesitantly, being 7:30 in the morning. And sure enough, it was an employee. And I knew that he was off work because his mother had passed away. So he's not, in terms of checking in with yourself, he's dealing with some grief right now. And he had called me because, being in HR, he wanted some advice around what his entitlements were. So the specific words I used with him was from a technical perspective, here's what I can tell you. But from a personal perspective, talk to your manager about that. And I recognize that there's a level of vulnerability when you have to share how you are feeling or what you are struggling with. But when it comes to something big, and this was his mother that passed away, this is big, the employer 100% will be compassionate. I think all employers need to be compassionate about situations like this. And whether they are or aren't, I hope that they are. Yes, the job still needs to get done. Yes, there are deliverables. And if you're forward facing, it becomes a challenge, but that's not something that should be on the burden of someone who's unwell. But that is a really good example of, taking care of yourself so that you can be of service in the best way possible. And so that was my advice for this individual today, was check in with your manager once the office opens, and it's up to you how much you want to share, 100%. And, maybe it's this, can we take it a day at a time? And then what I also said to him was, what's going to be helpful for you? Like, is client facing work going to be helpful for you? Or would you rather deal with administration? It's just this type of sort of brainstorming ideas to give that individual, in this particular case, what might be helpful. That's just one example. And I know that there are plenty of others. I want to say hello to some of the folks in the chat. So hello, Letiana's from Ottawa. Nice to see you here today. Simone from Edmonton, thanks for joining us. We also have Elizabeth, you're our regular, always here for every Mindful Mondays. Thank you so much. And Dawn, so nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. If any of you have specific examples that you'd like to share of strategies that has worked for you, whether it was you personally or whether it was something that you saw a leader do in terms of positive leader role modeling, please do share that in the chat. Ken and I are here to have this discussion and help facilitate the discussion, but I'm guessing, Ken, you don't have all the answers. And
I have absolutely every answer.
Yes.
By the way, sense of humor is one of the ways to reduce stress. Just make a notation of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, before moving on from this particular question, is this idea of self-awareness. So only you knows what is best for you. And this is where the work that I do around mindfulness comes in, is taking a step back, being mindful of what it is that you need at this very moment. And we just, before we came live here, Ken, you asked me about the weekend. Like, what can you do from a self-care perspective? I like to go hiking. I 100% like to connect with nature. I like my my physical feet on the ground.
Mhm.
That's what helps me to ground. But it's so different for everybody.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I think one of the things that you mentioned from your story and your example is, first of all, if we're not open about our condition, then we really can't seek help. But part of the challenge of being secretive or guarded, yes, I understand that some cultures are not as open. I think that's part of the shift, is that we need to be open about the situation, what's going on, what's happening, seek the help and reach out. So the person felt comfortable enough to reach out and call you, which in itself is an important indicator that I am seeking some assistance. The other thing I'd really caution about is, and this is one of my favorite sayings in every podcast I do, is everybody has an opinion, very few people have wisdom. And so be careful and cautious about who you seek out for advice, for direction, and I'm not trying to be judgmental here, but as parents of children, we didn't go to people who didn't have children to ask them about how to, manage children. I'm not saying that people that don't have children can't be good advisors, but at the same time, I want to look to, does this person really have a track record that they can give me sound advice? And you have to be really careful about that. The other one that I encourage people is that you have way more impact in decision making and responsibility that to make a difference personally than many people think. So as soon as we move into the victim mentality, then we have actually disempowered ourselves. So that's, and if we actually look at the research from a stress point of view, now there's situational conditions, such as you talked about the environment, what's occurred, lost a loved one. Okay, that is what that is. I can't change that. But most of our stress is lifestyle related. I mean, even the research is suggesting is as high as 95%. So when people says, well, this is my genetics, this is my predisposition, the reality is most of that is not true. And so if it's lifestyle related, then I have influence over the direction that I can go. So first of all, it's the openness is there. Now, way back when, in the 80s, I was a sales rep. So I went from doing sales into sales training. And just so that people are listening, I also have a diploma in nutrition and genetics and author of a wellness assessment you'll mention here shortly. But I was engaged to a lady in Brisbane, Australia. And I was the top sales rep in the company. And she phoned me on February 14th. Now, what day is that, Michelle?
Valentine's Day.
Okay, February 14th. They said, listen, from Brisbane, Australia, says, listen, I have found somebody else. Our engagement is off. So I was traumatized by that. It was a great weight loss program. I lost 15 pounds in 15 days just because of that stress level. Now, this is where, from a leadership point of view, we want to be conscious. My sales suffered because I was emotionally sort of disconnected, not dissimilar to the example that you just had this morning with your client. And so did the sales manager have to send me to a sales training program to increase my sales? No, I had nothing to do with that. It's in our model, which you've been through our training, Michelle, is around willingness, is that there were other factors that contributing to my engagement. So he just needed to be patient with me, bring around support to be able to get me to the other side. And I think that's where the direction is, rather than being punitive to the fact that you're not performing like you were. How can we help you recover? How can we get you into that next state? The other thing that we were talking about earlier as a personal story that's so important, I think that you have to take personal responsibility for your condition. And I know there's all kinds of environmental factors. We've all had background. I've had traumatic background as well, but I can't use that as an excuse for my current condition. So not too different of time frame, but in the 80s, I was misdiagnosed as manic depressive and put on an antidepressant called lithium. And it was not too long into taking the medicine, probably, or the pharmaceuticals, probably a week or something. I was ready to kill somebody because my body really didn't need it. And a friend of mine, because I belong to the National Speakers Association, said, Ken, you're not depressed. There's something else that's going on. And on my insistence, I went to and told my doctor, I didn't ask, I told him I need to take a glucose tolerance test. and discovered that I was hypoglycemic. So the hypoglycemia was contributing to the manic depressive condition. I wasn't manic depressive per se. It was the lifestyle that was contributing it, or the sugar, or the condition. So there's some recent research for those of you that are watching, and it's a sidebar as you have some questions there, is that my encouragement is that our diet and what we take into our system, as a hypoglycemic, I did the research, and as a nutritionist as well, is that in the 1800s, on average, we consumed about 2 to 5 to 6 pounds or 2 to 3 kilos of processed sugar per year. We're now around 150 pounds or over 50, 60 kilos of processed sugar in all things, corn syrup, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of links to our emotional state because of that, because of what it does to our mitochondria. So when we think about wellness and mindfulness, all of that's important, and that self-awareness also comes into that too, is what am I really putting into my system? A lot of these, I'll call it sources of messing with our system, are hidden. It's inserted into processed meats or whatever it is, right? Then as an agriculturalist, that's important. So I just mentioned that as a sidebar for our conversation today, that there is a lot that we can do and that we can take responsibility. And as your client did today, they reached out. Don't try to do this on your own and carry the burden on your own. Reach out to somebody that's going to support you, but also somebody you can trust in terms of their advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ken, because there's a couple things that came up for me when you were speaking. One is exactly what you said. You were taking personal responsibility and going, I don't know that this is quite right. And what I've learned in my experience is that while doctors are highly trained, they are also human beings. They also make mistakes. So take it with, do your research. What you're also talking about is mindfulness, is being mindfully aware of what's going on for you. And so well done for that. As we age, we become more aware of what we need. And so I suspect that back then you were also quite aware of your needs as well. And I think what you did here was, in a way, answered this question. I'm going to bring it up on screen from Elizabeth here around, wrong one here. Hang on, this is this is from Deepika. So I just want to do a shout out to Deepika here because she is working for Mindful HR Services as our HR intern. So thank you for sharing a few links in the chat today. But this is actually what I wanted to show you here, a question from Elizabeth in terms of what are good wellness strategies, easy to implement? Ken, any insights to share here?
Well, of course, we could go for quite a while on that. And first of all, I will, at the peril of self-promotion, is that you are licensed to use our stress indicator and health planner. And so first strategy is that wellness has multiple components. So thinking that it's any single item, I think you want to be broad in what are the contributing factors to my condition. So we outline that. I mean, our assessment is one of the longer ones that we have as far as the stress indicator health planner, with 120 questions. But each one of these areas that we talk about contribute to my stress load or stress level. And we are all aware that cortisol is a negative element that a chemical can come into our system and produced by ourselves based on the stress. So the number one is don't get stressed over your stressed, is that start paying attention. Okay, now I need to look at what are the factors or what are the conditions that are contributing to me. So we have the first part of our assessments around distress, so stress leaves clues. Behaviorally, psychologically, physically, right? Do I always have headaches? So I can't sleep? All these kinds of things that go into it. But the next four are actually pretty straightforward. And we had a client that had 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 employees, and they use this assessment every year with all the team members for 25 years. And one of the reasons they use it is low-hanging fruit. So let me just quickly, to answer that question, go into these other categories so that people get a sense of, first of all, what are the interpersonal dynamics that are going on that are contributing to your stress levels? So relationships, do I have tension with family members or work colleagues or whatever? So that could be like one item on a scale of 10, okay? And then we talk about nutrition and lifestyle. And of course, as a nutritionist, I just kind of get into that area. What am I doing? Am I eating? What am I eating? But also lifestyle. You talked about being outdoors. There was research by Dr. Amen said that by walking has more positive impact on people who are feeling down, lethargic, or even depressed than any medication long term because of the endorphin. So when you look at what's your lifestyle, are you sitting a lot, which I do now a lot as part of the work environment on the computer? Well, then sitting is the new smoking, according to some of the research. So you can look at what am I consuming? And so if I was to simply say this raw, real food, not processed food, no sugars, processed sugars, and then you're free to go. Just make it no more complicated than that. Lifestyle also, there's some new research around, you're talking about mindfulness, but there was a longitudinal study done, it was over 50 years. So one of the number one factors that contributed to longevity, generosity. So that was a lifestyle where if you're feeling really, really down, if you're go and give somewhere, there's always somebody else that's further down than you. So, the biblical saying says better to give than receive is actually biologically beneficial. That when you give and when you help and you assist. The next one we talk about is time. So everybody talks about time management. Well, there's no such thing as time management. There's only priority management. So you've done some work with our values assessment and trying to prioritize that. So one of the simple things is, how do I actually manage what I'm putting into my life? And do I actually build in margins for the things that you and your husband were doing this weekend about hiking? And my wife and I were doing that yesterday as well, prior to getting on this show, is to really combine two things: fitness, but also getting into nature. I love outdoors, but also then the relationship at the same time where we're connected. And then the final part is around work. So you were showing my book, Why Aren't You More Like Me? 80% of the workforce is not engaged. So if I'm in a role of responsibility that's not a fit for my personal style, other people call personality, then that's going to cause stress. If I'm in an environment that's not supportive, so in other words, if your client all of a sudden says, hey, somebody passed away in your family, go to work, forget it, I'm not going to talk to you, so that's that. And is the career path that you're in, because that's where we met, Michelle, is through the career space, is I don't really believe as much in the theory of careers as much as expertise and a calling and an assignment and purpose. So am I in the right spot doing the right thing, playing to my interests, gifts, talents, and abilities that enrich me and energize me? So all of these factors in little tidbits. So I might be a little bit interpersonal over here, not eating quite right there, not walking, not being active. I'm stressing myself by being overcommitted. And then all of a sudden I'm in a work environment that's really not a place that's nurturing to me. Well, then all of a sudden I got this stress load. But it's not any single factor that's creating the stress load. It's all of them combined. So I think the more you can break it down and just look at the little pieces, and don't get stressed over being stressed. Just back away, be mindful, go in this quiet place, and just start paying attention to what are the contributors to the stress load. And then sometimes people don't know what they don't know. That's why we created the assessment and the online course. And while they go to you for coaching or HR services, is that we can bring a perspective of these things are contributing to your condition. And for somebody who's gone through it, and been there and done that and had those challenges, and still, constantly there's so, driving by that fast food place and getting that quick ice cream. I mean, I do it in the summer. I say don't do it, but it's just managing that. And can you actually bring other people beside you to bring the discipline? Says, Michelle, we're going hiking. We're going to the gondola. We're going, oh, do we have? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that, Ken. I'm just going to pop up on screen here. What Ken was talking about was the stress indicator and health planner, really a fantastic tool. And what I always say about these tools is that it is a tool. It's not everything, right? It's a really nice complement to likely the knowledge you already have, in conjunction with whatever medical support you are receiving. This is not a substitute for seeking out any medical advice, not at all, but it can provide a bit of a baseline. And when I did this about 2 years ago. I first moved to BC just before the pandemic hit, and really like probably 2 weeks before we went into shutdown, Ken, I was in your office in Abbotsford, and I completed this assessment. And what I'll say about it is that no disrespect, it wasn't mind blowing, right? We know these things. But what it said to me was, here's a reminder, Michelle, of where you need to tighten up. Sugar 100% is one of those things. I know that I've got a sweet tooth, and there are healthier ways of managing my food intake for sure. The other thing that, as a bit of a sidebar in terms of managing wellness, is this month, my husband and I have committed to not drinking at all this month. And it's actually easier than I thought it was going to be. It's all about habits. Again, this comes back to mindfulness. Is what is it that you do after work? Well, I'm going to put out some olives and some nice cheese and pour a glass of wine. And while there's some research to support that, a nice glass of red wine from time to time is good for you, we also know that alcohol is a carcinogenic. So, you have to still enjoy life. And so having that ice cream cone that you talked about, Ken, is not necessarily a bad thing. If it's every day, it's likely not going to be good for you. Mm-hmm. So Elizabeth, I know you asked this question about some good, some easy to implement strategies for sure. Food intake, nutrition is one. Also, just when I think about organizations, we're going to talk a little bit about culture here before we wrap up, but ask the question, right? And you said this not that long ago, Ken, how can I help, right? What do you need right now? And so this is where the stress and health indicator that you were just talking about, Ken, it's a survey, right? There's data. You can't measure, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so you don't recognize maybe how much alcohol you're drinking or how you're not moving very much, right? This is where some of the apps, the digital watches, all of these tools that help us see our movement go, you know what, I had a really good walking day today, or yikes, that was a bad day, I'm going to do better tomorrow. When you know better, you do better. I see that we've talked this whole time, Ken, really talking about one particular question, but I would like to close with psychological safety. We've talked a lot about nutrition and I brought up alcohol as well. But what about psychological safety? I think we should talk a little bit about that. I think that might be a nice way to close. And I recently took some training with the Canadian Mental Health Association. We were given case studies to explore. We had to develop a psychological safety implementation plan. So this is like foundational type work. What it's not getting to is the meat of what you were looking for today here, Elizabeth, easy to implement tools. But I do think having this awareness of psychological safety is really important. And actually, it's not really important. It's not, it's a must have. This fits in really nicely with our topic today about workplace wellness. If you don't feel safe, if you don't have trust in the organization, if you don't have trust in your leaders, you're not going to get very far. So Ken, any thoughts on this before we wrap up today?
Well, I'm going to recommend Dr. David's Burns's book, Feeling Good, which we reference in training, right? And it's interesting, psychological safety, there's a certain amount of perception on this, but Dr. David Burns's quote is this, is that nobody has irritated or offended me unless I let them. And so when you talk about mindfulness, I'm not saying what they did is okay. I'm not saying what the environment is supportive, but how we respond to what is going to be a significant impact on the triggers. In other words, we all have had road rage probably sometime or another, but I have to take 100% responsibility for how I responded to that. I'm not saying that person's driving was okay, that they cut me off, but how I responded to them is in my camp. So every bit of irritation and offendedness is actually personally generated. And Dr. David Burns talks about that in Feeling Good. He uses this whole process around people who are feeling depressed or anger management. Remember the movie, right? With, I think it was De Niro or whatever was in it. So when we think about psychological safety, part of this safety is creating our own safety net around us on how we respond. Just be aware, what are the things that are triggering? And then from there are some people that really don't know, when you think about self-awareness, that's the number one space that Synergy operates. Many leaders and colleagues they don't know that they don't know that they don't know. So when Dr. Tasha did the book Insights, she said, what percentage of people believe that they're aware? So in spite of you saying that, okay, I knew a lot of these things in the Stress Indicator Health Planner, here's our experience. Majority of people don't, because you're more mindful, you're more developed than many other people who have really not put it on there. So Dr. Tasha acknowledged or said in her research that 95% of people believe that they know themselves and how they come across is congruent with how other people experience them. When she had her students go out and interview people around Michelle and Ken and said, how do you see each other? Only 10% were congruent. So when we think about, okay, do you really know what takes you out? Do you really know what's going on, what's happening? And you might say a statement to me and doesn't even bother me. Somebody else is completely traumatized for a week. Well, what's the difference? The difference is not what you said. The difference is how I responded to what you said. So can we be conscious and awake? And then if we're in a toxic environment, then how do I remove myself? How do I adjust myself? In that, you're right, psychological safety is important. I'm thinking about a family member. I can't kind of go into it right now, but they live in one of these extended care homes. And there is a new person who came in and destroyed the entire culture. She is so toxic. This new person destroyed this entire culture of 70 people, just one individual. So the other side of it is never underestimate the impact that one toxic person has. So psychological safety means is that leadership needs to take responsibility that when there are people who are quote unquote abusive or bully or whatever, that they are dealt with. So, I mean, I know we're getting close to the end here and there's lots more we could talk about it. But I think, first of all, we can be in charge of how we respond and just own that space and said, okay, I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I'm not appreciating what you said, but I'm not going to let that affect me. And that's Dr. David Burns' book, Feeling Good. And then the other side is, okay, now how do we create a safer environment with how we speak and how we support one another? And quite frankly, a lot of people have not been trained on it. They don't even know that my comments are offensive to you, or that my comments are derogatory or negative. And, we teach personality. Some people just have a critical spirit by nature. They don't even know that critical spirit is wiping out sort of the motivation within the team. So, I mean, we could go on for a few days.
Yeah, we do have to wrap up here, Ken. I will close with a bit of an HR perspective on this. So, first of all, I think that while leaders who may be listening may not appreciate this, but it's really about one-on-one. To your point, Ken, everyone receives information different. So having those one-on-one check-in meetings with your staff is going to be really important. And then the other piece from an HR point of view is if you are aware that something is going sideways in your organization and you do nothing about it, let's say there's bullying and a harassment or some sort of discriminatory practice, you can be held liable. Corporate liability is a real thing. So being sure that you have sound HR practices and policies in place that align with provincial or federal legislation is key to ensuring you have a culture that's going to be sustainable. And really, this is my goal with Mindful Mondays and with my company, Mindful HR Services, to create sustainable organizations. So we'll close with that today. Ken, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation.
Well, you're welcome, Michelle, anytime.
Thank you, Ken. I also want to give a thank you to our viewers again. It is a big topic here. I want to share this on screen here. Yes, Elizabeth, it's a big topic. So if you have more questions, please reach out to Ken. You can find him here on LinkedIn. Of course, you know where to find me as well. Deepika, thank you for sharing all of those links. Deepika is looking for full-time employment in HR. She'll be with me until mid-December, and then after that to fly off and explore more her career in HR. So please reach out to her if you have any leads. Thank you, Dawn, for showing up today. Letty Anna, Simone, Amy, thank you all to all of you, and anyone that I may have missed that I'm not seeing here online. Thank you for showing up. Before we close, I want to tell you about the next Mindful Monday. As many of you know, we typically meet on the third Monday of the month. However, December is different. From a wellness perspective, I'm going to be taking some time off. My husband and I are actually going to Costa Rica for a few weeks. And so I'm going to put my feet in the sand, enjoy the sun. And because of that, our next Mindful Monday is on December the 5th. That's the first Monday of the month. We're also going to be talking about a big topic, vulnerability in the workplace. We're going to be discussing real work examples, real workplace examples of how this key leadership skill creates trust. Really big. And my guest is coming all the way from the UK. His name is Mark Hammond. He runs an organization called Connectivity Consulting. I hope you will join us on December the 5th. Thank you again, Ken, for your time today. And to our viewers, thank you again for supporting Mindful Mondays. And until next time, be well.